Hi, everyone, and welcome to Orchestral Recording 101. My name's India Hooi, and I'm a recording and mixing engineer. I'm from Australia originally, but currently based in Miami in the USA. And I recently finished the Audio Video Fellowship at New World Symphony, where I got to do a lot of orchestral recording, live sound as well, and it was an amazing experience. And I'm also originally a classical pianist, and I play a few different instruments, and I sing and compose. So classical music recording is really my niche that I love to do with audio, though I've done other genres as well, and some sound design for media and other things too. Oh yes, firstly, sorry that my spoken audio is not great quality. I just moved house and literally everything's packed away in boxes, so I didn't get to set up any better microphone, unfortunately. But hopefully you can hear me okay. So the orchestra. So I imagine some of you might have recorded orchestral instruments and been to orchestra concerts, and maybe some of you haven't. So let's start with a few main concepts that are important to think about when you record an orchestra. So an orchestra has a huge dynamic range, a huge range of different instruments and sound textures. So it could be anywhere from 50 to 100 musicians. It could be a chamber orchestra with early music instruments that are fairly quiet sounding, or it could be a modern piece that also has live electronics or playback, or it could be a crossover concert that mixes orchestra with a rock band or a Latin band or EDM. So there's a huge range of different kinds of sounds that an orchestra could have. And in general, the aim is to capture the natural sound of the orchestra as well as the surrounding acoustics, but also to optimize it for a great listening experience. So we're not trying to make it sound like it does when you're sitting in the audience, because depending on where you're sitting, you might hear the orchestra very close if you're in the front row, or if you're way back up in the hall, it'll sound a lot more distant. Or you might be sitting closer to the percussion if it's one of those halls that's got seating behind the orchestra. So basically, when we're recording, we're kind of making it sound like we're in the conductor's position, so in the best listening position, and we hear everything balanced. So when you're going to do a recording, you need to think about the purpose of the recording, whether it's a live streamed concert, or is it an archival concert recording? Is it an actual recording session for something that's going to be released? Or is it a film or game soundtrack recording session? You also have to think about the kind of space you're recording in, as this could greatly affect your microphone choices and the type of sound that you're going to create. As with any recording, pre-production is really important. You should find out as many details as you can about these things. The recording space, is it a hall or is it a smaller room? The repertoire, or the music that they're going to play, and the instrumentation, so exactly what instruments are going to be playing. The player's seating information, where are they going to be seated, because orchestras can have different formats as to where the different players are seated. Copies of the scores if you need that for editing or mixing. And if it's a live concert, are there any other elements to be recorded? For example, speeches, video projections that might have audio, and whether you need to record those as well. If it's a recording session, Do you need to set up a talk back with the conductor or the composer in order to communicate? And will there be video recording as well? Because that may affect how you're going to record the sound or how you might be allowed to set up things on stage. So all of these are important. So let's look a little more into recording space. So whether it's a hall or a studio, it's important to know the space that you'll be recording in, because the size and the shape, the acoustics of a hall or room will affect the sound and your microphone choice and placement. Because it's not like a recording studio setting where you have complete control over the sound, because you're able to, because perhaps the sound is more dead, or you're able to move baffles around to create the perfect acoustic environment. But in this case, you have to work with the acoustic itself. So if a hall is large with a very nice sounding, spacious reverb, you could place the microphones a bit further away to capture this natural ambience. But if the hall is smaller and drier, or if it has some reflections that make the sound muddy, you may want to put your microphones closer and add some artificial reverb. You also need to find out some logistical things, such as, can you hang microphones from the ceiling or from a canopy, or will you be restricted to using stands on the stage? You should also think about where you're able to run cables, where you can set up your recording gear and have a space for monitoring. So all this is very important, especially if you're going to be doing a recording in a space that you don't work in regularly, so that you can have a successful recording. So here is an example of a stage diagram. So this was made by our stage manager, Adam, at New World Symphony, who is super organized. So we are very lucky that we would always get this very concise stage diagram. But of course, it's not always the case, because some orchestras are maybe not as organized, or you might not have a chance to see such a good diagram as this. So we can see we have the conductor in the middle, the strings on the first lift. And we can see from this diagram that this stage has different tiers, and you can see they're actually, we actually have the measurements written for each level. So we know that each level is going to be going up slightly, and the percussion and brass at the back are going to be higher up. So that may also influence our mic choices. We can see we've got quite a big string section. We've got woodwinds in the middle, brass towards the back, and then percussion and timpani. And we can also see there's a note that there are music stand lights used. So that means that there's probably projections, and that's why they need lights on each of the musicians' stands. So some other documents that could be helpful are getting a roster, which is the list of the players and the instruments for each piece. The program, which is the list of all the pieces played for a concert. And scores, which at the front of the scores, they include a list of the exact instrumentation. So you can see like what percussion exactly is being played, and if there are any other unusual instruments. And yes, thank you for asking your questions, and we'll get to them at the end. So here is an example of an input sheet. And so this particular sheet was made by Roberto, who was my colleague and mentor at New World Symphony. So this was for a concert of all Sibelius music, and it's the input sheet that goes with the stage diagram that we just saw before. So you can see that we have our input for our Pyramix system. And we have the floor pocket, which is the connection in the stage, because our stage have these pockets and each have mic connections in there. We also used snakes too. So when we label them as S1, S2, it's snakes, and then the L numbers are the different lifts. So when you're working with such a large number of microphones, it's really important to have some kind of input sheet with a list of where everything's connected in the stage, as well as the input, so that you can keep everything organized. You can also see we have Pyramix delay, which is where we measure the distance between the spot mics and the main array. More about that later. We write down the mic that we decide to use, the type of mount as well. So MSM means music stand mount, because some of them we mounted to under the music stands. Others were using clamps. Others were tall stands with boom arms. So a whole variety. And then our Horus, which is our sound card, and then the card slot. So all of this helps to keep everything very organized, because otherwise it can become a chaos if you don't document everything, especially if you're working with more than one person. And so you can see we've got a variety of microphones. We've got some on individual instruments, like on the different violin stands, and on each horn. And then some of them, such as the brass, are on 2 players. Some of the winds are also sharing mics. And then at the end, in the blue from channels 169, you can see we've got a Decker tree, which is our main array. And then those other mics at the end are all hanging mics. So they kind of capture more of the overall sound of different sections. So, but more on that later as well. So this is all part of the pre-production, that you need to make an input sheet so that you are well prepared, because often you may only have a short amount of time to set up. So, and yes, thank you for the comment. Someone said it's it's pretty. It is. So credit to Roberto for making this input sheet. So you might also, if you're doing a location recording, you might want to make a gear list. And if you're driving to a hall that is far away, this can be very important, so that you don't leave anything behind. So here's kind of a basic gear checklist that you might, of things you might use for an orchestra recording. So of course you've got your microphones, plus clips and stands, other accessories such as stereo bars, or your cables, your audio interface or recording system, laptop chargers, of course, backup recording devices and hard drives, headphones or monitors for listening. If it's a recording session, perhaps headphones and headphone amps for the musicians. And power boards, extension cables, I would always bring extra as well, because you never know. And then gaffer tape can be very important, useful for making cables neat, but also for fixing things that break. A table and chair if you need it, if the location doesn't provide it. Your input lists and take sheet and any scores can be useful if you're doing a recording session, to have a recording please do not enter sign. And of course, all your cases and bags, as well as other useful things such as tools and measuring tape, extra turnarounds or adapters. You never know when you're going to need it, and you don't want to have to go and drive back, especially if you're short on time. So let's look a little more into the orchestra instruments and the positions of the orchestra. So here's an awesome diagram from the Kennedy Center website. So we can see our typical instruments and positioning for an orchestra. So this is kind of like a standard positioning, and I know this is used a lot here in the USA, but there are other positionings that are used. Like a German style sometimes has like the cellos and basses on the other side. So it's always important to find out which configuration an orchestra is using. So we can see we have the conductor in the middle, and we've got to the left our upper strings, the first and second violins. And then to the right, we've got our lower strings. So that's the violas and the cellos. Then in the center green section, we have woodwinds. So we have flutes, clarinets, oboes, and bassoons. Then behind that, in the yellow section, we've got brass. So we've got French horns. There could be like for anywhere from 2 to 8 French horns, depending on the repertoire. And we've got the rest of our brass, so trumpets, trombones. Sometimes there's a bass trombone and a tuba. So depending on the piece, there could be a lot more brass or there could be less brass. So then we've got some other instruments on the far left. We've got a piano and harp. So there's usually only one piano unless it's an unusual piece with more than one piano. There could be one harp, commonly 2 harps, or I've seen up to 4 harps once in a big piece. And then we've got our percussion. So we've got timpani, which is very, very common, and it's often placed more towards the center. And then there could be all kinds of different percussion instruments. So commonly there is a bass drum, there might be marimba or xylophone, a snare drum, triangle, and all kinds of smaller instruments. You might sometimes also have other keyboard instruments such as a celesta. And you can see that the louder instruments are towards the back, so all the brass and percussion, and then the quieter instruments, which are the strings, is towards the front. So, and yes, I see someone commented on the fact that the basses are on the side. And yeah, this is an interesting choice. And actually, I'm not sure who decided on this when orchestras were first being formed, but some conductors do prefer to place the basses towards the center left so that you get a more bass-centered sound, and then have the first violins on the left and then the second violins on the right. So it all depends, yeah, on the conductor and on the piece. So that's why it's always important to find out before you, while you're doing your pre-production. Microphones and placement. So generally, most people record orchestras with a set of main microphones, which are positioned high above the head of the conductor and the front of the orchestra. And then additionally, there are spot microphones, which are positioned closer to certain instruments that need more detail. And there'll often be an ambient pair of microphones further away to pick up the acoustic of the space. So in this picture, you can see the New World Symphony in the New World Center Hall. And we have our ambient mics hanging up really high above, because this is not a huge hall, it's quite small, so we can't hang them very far back. So instead of that, we have them hanging very far up above the orchestra. But this all depends on the kind of hall, of course. So the types of mics commonly used. So often microphones with quite a flat frequency response are preferred so that you can capture the natural sound of the instruments. Because unlike some other genres like rock or pop, um, classical and orchestral music is very delicately balanced and it's not going to be heavily processed in post-production. And the conductor is doing the job of balancing the instruments to their taste. So that's why we want microphones that capture the natural sound. So some of the mics that are very commonly used in orchestral recording are Sherps or Sheps, depending on how you pronounce it. The Colette series, which are those gray pencil mics. DPA is also very popular, the different instrument mics as well as the clip-on mics. Neumann's KM, TLM, and M series. The AKG 414 is always popular, of course. So is Sennheiser's MKH series. Of course, these are all very expensive mics, but you can also make it work with more affordable mics. So some of the ones I've used before are Line Audio, Rode, Octava, SE, and Loughton's LA series. So, of course, yeah, if you have a more expensive mic, it may sound more detailed and better, but having a smaller budget shouldn't prevent you from making good recordings too. So here are some examples of some common techniques for main arrays or stereo techniques. So the first one we have is the Decca tree that was developed by engineers working with Decca. So it's like a space pair, very widely spaced pair, and then a center microphone to kind of fill out that middle space. And this could be anywhere from like 2 meters wide and 1 meter forward, or it could be smaller, like half that size. It all depends on how spaced out the orchestra is, or if it's a really big orchestra or a smaller chamber orchestra, you could increase or decrease the size of the Decca tree. Another one is the AB or spaced pair, which is two omnis together on the same bar pointing forwards. Another one is the ORTF, which is using cardioids that's at an angle of 110 degrees. And this one often works if you maybe are in a hall that doesn't sound as nice because it's cardioids, it picks up slightly less of the hall sound. So they're all three really good options. So the main array, whether it's hanging from the ceiling or if it's on a tall sound, it will capture a lot of the sound of the orchestra and detail of the strings at the front. And then additionally, we often use two Omni microphones very high on the outer front edges of the orchestra. So like in front of the violins and then in front of the cellos and the basses. And they're often called outriggers. So those will help up to pick up more of the outside strings and help to widen the image as well. So yeah, the sort of the front array is your AB or your Decca or your RTF or another stereo technique plus your outriggers. Spot microphones. So you could use spot microphones in cardioid placed on individual instruments, especially if they have solos that you want to be able to control and to push up as needed. And you could also use spot mics in cardioid or wide cardioid on pairs of players or even on groups of players, so like a section, or some people like to use a figure eight between two players. Or a whole section of instruments might work with an omnidirectional mic hanging above or on a tall stand. So you can see in this picture we have various percussion, and we've used 414s to kind of mic the sections, because when there's so much percussion, it's impossible to mic every single instrument. And of course, it depends on whether you're doing like a session recording or a concert that's going to be released. Then you may want to put more microphones. But if it's just an archival recording, then you may just use like one or two section mics in Omni to get the general sound. So it all depends, of course, on like the purpose of the recording, and of course, how many mics and channels you have access to. So the placement of spot microphones might be different depending on what kind of sound you want to achieve, whether you want a very close and detailed sound or if you want a more blended and spacious sound. And if you use mics hanging, like for example, if you use mics that are hanging above, it will sound a little more blended and a little more distant. But if you put the mics very close, you'll have a more detailed and dry sound. So for example, soundtracks for Hollywood films or games, especially in action genres, often have this very detailed and close sounding recording to create this kind of big, bold and epic sound that's panned really wide. So a detailed spot mic list might include, as you saw earlier on the input sheet, like the violins 1, violins 2, violas, cellos, double basses, flutes, oboes, clarinets, bassoons, and the horns may or may not be individually mic'd. The brass, you might need minimum of 2 mics, or you might need 5 or 6 if you want to mic them individually. The timpani, percussion, the piano, celesta, and soloists, of course. And if it's for a video broadcast, you may need to, or you may like to do quite a detailed recording if the video is going to be showing very close-up shots of instruments and solos. So you might need to think about how the sound matches the video that people are going to be seeing. Or if it's just a very wide shot, including the whole hole, you may want a further away sound. So it's all subjective, really, and you have to decide. Sometimes if there are a lot of cameras, you may need to, or you might be requested to try and avoid too many tall stands because it could block the video shot. And lastly, depending on the acoustics of the space and the purpose of the recording, as I said, you might use different combinations of hanging Omni mics or spot mics, and you may choose to use fewer microphones or more microphones. So in the end, it's up to you to use your ears and to make decisions based on the sound that you're hearing and the sound you want to create. So a few notes about live concert recording versus recording sessions. So a live concert often requires a very quick setup, and you might only have one rehearsal to sound check, whereas you might have an archive recording, or you might have a live or future broadcast or a concert that's going to be uploaded. While with a recording session, you have more time to set up and to perfect your mic placement, and you'll be able to have several takes. A live concert, you have to often mix on the fly, especially if it's being broadcast, and you may or may not have a producer or score reader. And there's generally minimal editing if it's live broadcast, or if it's going to be used for something, you might have to edit between two concerts. And in a recording session, you often work more closely with a conductor or even a composer via the talkback. It's important for someone to be a producer. It might be yourself as well. I've been in that situation, or it could be another person, and make a lot of notes about what takes are being recorded in the score, because then you need it for editing and mixing afterwards. So something about mixing. So the purpose of having like your main array and your spot mics and ambient mics is to create a good balance between the acoustic of the room and the orchestra as a whole, and then the closer detailed sound of individual instruments and sections. It can be really useful to listen to reference recordings of the pieces, or to go and hear a rehearsal of the orchestra if you can. So you can hear the conductor's balance of the instruments and then how it sounds in the space. And then compared to mixing other genres, we use less processing because we're trying to capture and enhance the natural sound and the balance of the instruments. And because the orchestra has such a huge dynamic range. And of course, panning plays a big part in creating the natural width of the orchestra from the conductor's perspective. So that's why the stage diagrams can be so useful, because you can see exactly where everyone's sitting and try to recreate that. So some commonly used processing includes EQ, subtle compression on some mics, a limiter or compressor on the master bus, and especially if it's a live broadcast and you need to raise the overall level, as well as reverb, depending on the acoustic. Some halls you may not need any artificial reverb, and others you definitely do need it to make the listening experience better. And yes, I did see a question about using a clapboard to time align spot mics. So yes, we do that at New World Symphony usually. So some engineers do like to measure the delay between the spot mics and the main mics by doing a clap in front of the mics, and then inputting it into your DAW to time align the signals. And you can decide, I mean, it's really subjective. Some people do it and some don't. I like to do it for orchestra, but not for chamber music. It does change the sound slightly. It can make it a little clearer. But for me, for chamber music, I often don't do it because I kind of like that little delay, how it sounds. But yes, I think for orchestra, when you have so many mics, it can help make it a little clearer. So if you're live mixing for a live stream or broadcast, following the score can be really useful to anticipate the solo parts or melodies that you would like to highlight by gently bringing up the level of those spot mics. So a fader controlling all the mics can be used to subtly bring up the level in the sections that are very quiet, because a lot of orchestral pieces have like very quiet pianissimo parts and then very loud parts. So you sometimes need to control the whole mix so that it is not too quiet and it can be heard. And of course, if you're mixing in post-production, you can use automation or clip gain to do all these things to bring out the solos and control the dynamics. So here's an example of my mix window in Pyramix for that same concert of Sibelius music. So you can see I've like colored different sections. The blue microphones are my hanging mics. So I've got a Decker tree, I've got my outriggers, and I've got my hall, which is the ambient mics. And then I've sort of grouped them in colors by sections. So the orange is the strings, and then the red is the woodwinds. And there's some more on the next page. And then we can see that I've got 3 buses on the right side. I've got my monitor bus for my general listening. I've got a video bus, which for this particular concert, which was with video. I think it was, yeah, live stream perhaps. I can't remember. But anyway, the video bus is used to send my audio signal to the video booth. And if necessary, I would put extra processing on that particular bus in order to bring up the level to um, an appropriate level for streaming online. So I would like also make sure that I was monitoring that particular bus if it was a live stream. Then I also have a print bus, which allows me to do like a live board mix and record it to a track. So then I could, if it was for an archive or if that particular live mix was fine, then I could just take that print mix and export it. So here you can see the rest of my mix window. The yellow, we have the brass, and then I have the green is 2 percussion microphones, and the blue is timpani. So for this particular one, there was no other piano instruments, and the percussion section wasn't that huge. Then you can see I have some VCAs, VCA groups for each of the different sections. So you can see there's like a gray, we have our brass, so we have horns, and then we have a horn VCA, so I can control all of the horns together if I want to bring the whole horn section up or down. And then I also had different mute groups, which is something that I like to use for each different well, when it's a concert, I like to have a mute group for each piece so I could mute mics that are not needed for a certain piece and unmute them easily. So that's what those VCAs are. So let's have a listen to this particular recording. So it's from a couple of months ago. It's New World Symphony playing Sibelius Symphony No. 4, the 4th movement. So have a listen to the panning in particular and see if you can hear like all those things we described before, like the basses and cellos are on the right, the violins are on the left, and listen out for some of the string and wind solos. So let me see. All right. Thank you for your comments, everyone. Um, so let's talk a little bit about the editing and mastering. So, and this depends, you may have to do editing, obviously, if it's a recording session, or sometimes you may have to edit a live concert if the conductors request it. So unlike many other genres of music recording, editing, classical recording is done entirely linearly on your timeline. So you're cutting and pasting and moving all the tracks together. And for a studio recording, you might have a lot of takes to piece together. Or for a concert recording, some orchestras might request that the best parts of 2 or more concerts are edited together. And some commonly used DAWs for orchestral recording and editing are Pyramix and Sequoia, because they have features that are very convenient for large track count recording and editing. For example, source destination editing allows you to listen easily to several takes and then select the best parts and then send them to a destination track with a separate timeline. So that's really convenient when you have like a massive amount of tracks. You can organize them all and like compress them all into one track and then have your different takes set out and then pick and choose them and send them to your destination track. It's very awesome. And of course, when you're editing several takes together, it's important to use your crossfades to make it very subtle and make sure the tempos or the speed match, as well as the dynamics and the energy of the music if you're editing different takes together. This can be quite a challenge sometimes. Classical mastering aims to just enhance the natural sound of the recording and to preserve the dynamic range. So we aim to achieve a loudness of around -18 to -23 LUFs, but without compressing or processing too much. So that can be the challenge when it's an extremely dynamic piece, just trying not to squash anything if it needs to be louder, and making sure that the extremely quiet parts can still be heard. And you might use subtle EQ, compression, and limiting just to refine the tone of the mix, but without altering the natural sound too much. So we don't want any heavy processing in the mastering stage. So let's take a listen to another piece. This one is with video. So it's a recording that I did a couple of years ago, also for New World Symphony for the holiday concert. Very fun. And it was also live streamed and it was wallcast, which is like a big projection that we have on this huge wall for people to come and watch and listen in the park outside. So yeah, this piece has some celesta, which is the keyboard instrument, and a lot of different percussion. So listen out for that. So this is Carol of the Bells. glad you all enjoyed that. It's always really fun to see what costumes the orchestra wears, and definitely the the flute with the beard is my favorite too. Um, so I mean, there's a huge amount of resources on recording orchestras, and we've just kind of gone over a few of the basics. Of course, it's like an art and a science that one is constantly learning. I know I'm still learning and improving. I did write a blog post about recording an orchestra, which goes over, yeah, some of the basics like we've looked at today. So you might want to check that out. It's on the Sound Girls website. There's a fantastic book, Classical Recording, A Practical Guide in the Decca Tradition, which is written by Decca audio engineers. That's a really great book, which goes over a lot of details. There's also the fantastic DPA Mike University articles on DPA's website, and they've got quite a few articles about classical recording and miking different instruments. So, thank you very much for listening to my talk today. I hope you found it enlightening. And you can find me on LinkedIn or Instagram and feel welcome to connect with me. I'll just have a look at your questions here and see if I can answer any of these, and feel free to add more questions. Okay, so let's see. I have a question from Sonus Artis. Oh, yes, you asked about time arrival differences. So as I said before, yes, especially at New World Symphony, we always would record the delay and then input the time arrival difference in order to combat. And I want to note as well that with New World Symphony, our hall, the New World Center, is fairly small and doesn't have a long reverb time. And it has quite a lot of reflections, especially for louder instruments such as brass and timpani. So let me see if I can go back to that slide actually. So you can have a look at the hall that I'm talking about. Where is it? Here it is. Yes. So this is our hall, which is quite small. And that's why we do a lot of close miking and actually use quite a bit of artificial reverb. So that's what you heard in the recordings as well. There's reverb and close miking, because in this particular hall, if you put the mics further away, it can start to sound muddy and less clear. Whereas if you're in a larger hall with a kind of more spacious reverb, then it would sound nicer, and you could perhaps use fewer mics because the reverb and the space, there's more space for the sound to go. Let me see what other questions there are. Stephanie said, how do you achieve pre-production goals when your show is unorganized as far as lack of documentation? Yes, I have also experienced that before with other ensembles. And I mean, unfortunately, there's not very much you can do apart from just try to have a very flexible mind and be realistic about how much you can get done. So, like if an ensemble asks you to do a full recording, but they don't provide enough time or rehearsal sound check time to set up, then you maybe have to reduce the amount of mics you're going to use and let them know that it will be an archival recording in nature. So like fewer mics and less detailed sound, or they need to increase your budget so that you can hire a couple of assistants and get more mics up in a shorter amount of time. But yeah, so it's all a question of weighing up time versus money versus realistic expectations. And yeah, sometimes you, I guess, have to be flexible and just make decisions um, so that, so that the recording gets done to the level that you can do it. Because of course, with these New World Symphony recordings, we have the luxury of being the in-house audio engineers with the huge range of mics available, and plenty of time to set up. So that's not always the case, of course, in other situations. There was another question. Let's see. About using a clapboard at the back of the orchestra to time align mics. So what we actually would do is use a clap in front of the Decca tree and then measure from the Decca tree. So we would measure in the recording, in the door, measure the samples between the Decca tree and every single instrument. Let's see what else. And oh yes, so someone asked how many mics were used for that particular piece. So you could see, where is it? This input sheet here, that these are the mics that we used for that particular piece. So we had our hanging mics and our main array and then our spot mics. What is the best method of miking wood xylophone versus metal xylophone? Yeah, that's a good question because wood has a very different sound to metal. And honestly, I can't give a definite answer. It's all about using your ears. So perhaps for a metal xylophone, you would not choose a microphone that has a high frequency boost because that's going to be too intense. Or you would probably EQ them differently as well, potentially. It's in the end, it's all about experimenting and listening. Like I can't say I'm an expert on every single percussion instrument, but every time I just try to go in and listen, and if I have time to adjust the placement, it could be above, sometimes underneath. It's all about experimenting and listening. So another question, how would the conductor react if one of the player misses a note or plays a wrong note? Well, that's why I guess they have so many rehearsals. And to begin with, in professional orchestras, the players are already so fantastic because they've gone through a very rigorous audition process to even get into the orchestra. But I feel like a good conductor would not get angry at someone. They would just realize that maybe more rehearsal needs to be done, or some instruments also are prone to missing notes, such as French horn, because it's so difficult. So it can even happen in a professional orchestra. So yeah, it's definitely a good conductor has a blend of being able to lead, but to have a lot of patience as well. And let me just check. What else? How much do you think about phasing when setting up your mics? Yeah, to be honest, not a huge amount because I guess it's more about listening and figuring out if you hear something strange, especially between different pairs of mics. Like we once discovered that our ambient mics were out of phase, and so we just ended up flipping one of them because it would be so difficult to actually move them. So I guess for me, I'm also coming from a musician background rather than an engineer, very technical background. So it is very much listening and intuitive. Dominic asks, what can you do in the mixing stage if your mix you get back has a lot of phasing issues because of time arrival, but also because of bleed from other mics? I guess it's a case of maybe trying to flip the phase, also adjusting, because the reality is with classical and any acoustic recording, you are going to have a lot of bleed and you kind of have to embrace that. So It's a matter of trying to figure out how you can adjust the levels of your maybe 30, 40, 50 mics to try and get the best balance and to try to reduce any of those issues. So it is, I guess it's an art, is what I'm trying to say, and it's about listening. At live concerts, how do you use artificial reverb? Do they have to be native on the sound recorder, or do you have any good plugins with low latency? So for our live concerts, we're lucky with New World Symphony to have a very stable Pyramix Horus system. And we do, for most of the processing, try to use the Pyramix native plugins. But for reverb, we do use a different plugin. So we use Seventh Heaven, which is fantastic. I know a lot of people use Altiverb. If you're on the budget side of things, I've used Valhalla Vintage Verb. I find that fantastic too. Let's see. Billy asks, for soundtrack recordings, what kind of communication instructions from the composer or orchestrator have you found useful to receive prior to the session? Good question. So I would probably sit down with the composer and the conductor if possible, or ask them if they have particular ideas about the sound, if they can give me any reference recordings for recordings that they like the sound of, or if they have any specific ideas as to whether they want it to sound very close and detailed or if they want it to sound more reverby. Also how close they want soloists to sound, or if this can also happen in the mix stage as well, of course. Often you might have the conductor or composer or orchestrator come and listen in the mix stage and the editing stage. So communication is constantly happening. Emmanuel said, for live sound, are there certain instruments you recommend must be mic'd up, or sections that we should target first if we have to make miking sacrifices? So for live sound, depends on the situation. Like if everything is being amplified in an orchestra, it's often because maybe it's with a rock band, or like I've a couple of times had a Latin band that was all amplified, and so the orchestra had to be amplified too. And so in that case, well, this New World Symphony has a lot of these clip-on mics to go onto the violins themselves. So definitely instruments that are quiet, like violins, do need to be mic'd up, because otherwise they'll be swallowed up by any other loud amplified instruments, such as like jazz horns or drum set. So definitely the quiet instruments should be mic'd up, and in general, I guess you try to mic the whole orchestra as much as possible if there is a band as well. Another question from Sonus. Would you delay the soloist mic for a piano or violin in front of the orchestra as you would spot mics? Yes. So I'd also measure the delay for the soloist mic, and often it will be very short because the soloist mic is often very close to the decca-tree. But yeah, you either have to delay all of the spot mics or none of them. So, all right. So I think that's all that I have time for today. So I'm just going to leave my contact info here. And you're really welcome to contact me with any further questions, because I'm really excited that people are interested in orchestral recording. For me, it's like, yeah, it's my favorite kind of recording to do because it's so exciting. And I hope many of you will be encouraged to do more orchestra recording. There's a fantastic Facebook group, actually, that if you're interested, you can join. I'll put it in the chat. It's called Classical Music location recording Facebook group. It's a really great group where people can ask questions, people share like advice and info, and it's a really great community. So thank you everyone so much. I really appreciate you being here today, and feel free to get in touch with more questions. All right, I'll catch you later. See ya.